Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game Esoteric. I got a fun and random episode for you guys this Friday because after 3 years we are looping back around to Apple Pippin territory because you all keep asking me about this console and a lot of people ask me whether or not they should buy one. So I figured I would do a new hardware overview as well as tell you about the games I think you should play on the Apple Pippin. But spoiler right up front, should you buy an Apple Pippin? No. Don't do it. They're stupid. I'll explain why soon. All jokes aside, it is a very weird platform that doesn't have a ton going for it. But it does have super marathons. I mean, I guess in that respect, if you want to spend the $1,000 plus to buy a copy, you too can play it on your own Apple Pippin. The thing about the Pippin is that it is very fun hardware. I love the design. This thing is massive and it is heavy and it is just a computer in a box with this really fun whole set of buttons up top to basically control almost everything that happens in the Pippin. I understand why people like this thing. It looks fun, it's a console designed by Apple and Bandai, it's got a lot to love about it. And this one here is not a release Pippin. This is actually a development prototype unit I was able to acquire like 3.5 years ago from a computer recycler in Cupertino, California. So this is a dev unit, making it even rarer than a standard Pippin would be. If we take a look around the back, it's very easy to deal with a Pippin. It has a universal power supply in there that'll run from 100 to 240 volts at 50 or 60 hertz. It has VGA out as well as a PAL to NTSC switch, giving you S-video or composite out no matter what format you deal with. So one Pippin is basically a universal product. You can even hook up things like printers or internet adapters for it. Not that you're going to do that. You will see there, PAL territory is totally fine. If you do want to collect for a Pippin, just buy whatever one is the cheapest and works. It'll be perfectly fine for you. Just be aware that there are black at-world units as well, the exact same Pippin, English language release, like 3 times the price. Now taking a look at the bottom, you will see that this unit is a sample for evaluation only, and that is because this is a development prototype unit. It is getting close to a final release, but it is not there yet. So it's a very fun piece of my collection that I absolutely would never part with, but it is definitely also not something I ever use much. And as we go back to old footage and look inside, you'll see that that has the Kinka prototype ROM in there, and I was inside changing the battery up. But I will tell you, taking a Pippin apart is an absolute nightmare. It is not something you want to do. And because this is a prototype unit, if we open this door here, there was a slot for RAM expansions on the Pippin because the base RAM did not allow you to play all the Pippin games correctly, which is a very big miss. Now this is a 4 megabyte expansion pack, which is also a prototype unit. They were never sold in 4 megabyte configurations as far as I can tell, but it is in there and it does allow us to play some games either with more features or at all, because Pippin seemed to have a RAM limitation. The initial RAM that came in the system without being expanded was not enough. Now this is an old video that I'm reusing as I am not taking apart this stupid thing twice. I will tell you right now, if you want to dismantle your Pippin to fix it, this ribbon cable right here, amazingly easy to get out, incredibly difficult to reinsert. It took me like an hour to do it the first time. There's also a ton of tabs that are plastic and they are quite delicate. Once you get to this stage, it's pretty easy. It is just a PC in a box, but getting all the plastic off of a Pippin is one of the most difficult things you can do outside of dismantling a PCFX. It is not a fun chore. Don't do it if you don't have to. But now that we're inside here, it is just a PowerPC based computer. There's nothing unique about it. It even has that kind of low profile server style power supply. Now if we move over to the controller, the Apple Jack, I will say I don't hate this. This is a prototype as well. It is not Pippin branded where it should be there. You have a D-pad, you have a trackball because it is a PC in a box, and you have the 4 face buttons as well as 3 navigation buttons on the bottom. I will say it's quite a comfortable controller to hold, but the face buttons are some of the smallest things I've ever seen. The D-pad is adequate, not great, not good. The trackball is a nice touch because a lot of the Pippin games are going to be point-and-click adventure games, and that works perfectly for them. But I'm going to put my pinky up against the size of a button right here, this little yellow one, and you are going to see just how incredibly small these are. It can be a little bit of a pain in the ass to play this thing because my pinky is bigger than that button by far. If we take a look at the back of the controller, there is a left and a right button, which are almost always configured to mouse clicks. In some games, maybe they're going to be strafe, but considering you have that trackball on the front, 9 out of 10 times they're going to be used for navigation purposes, and it doesn't make sense. Now moving to a quote-unquote Pippin game, this is Jungle Island, and this is one of my favorite Pippin games of all time. It is a very weird and unique game made by Saru Brunei that would go on to make Cube of War. The thing about this is the Macintosh release, not the Pippin release, although with a few file articulations in a computer, you can make this run on a Pippin. The reason I own this version, not the Pippin version, is we're talking about $30 US versus like $300 US, and you get way more with this version as well. Collecting Pippin games is for the absolute absurd of you. It is not worth buying them. So many of them are multiple hundreds of dollars, and they are in no way, shape, or form worth that. The thing about the Pippin Jungle Island disc is that if you just put it in a standard G3 laptop running an OS before 10, it's just going to work. You don't even need to have a Pippin to play Pippin games, so if there was one game out there you absolutely wanted to buy, just check to see if it has a Macintosh executable on it, because all the Pippin is a Macintosh in a box, and the operating system is on the disc, not on the computer, as a Pippinized CD. So honestly, if you're collecting for Pippin, you may as well just buy the Macintosh version, because you can make it run on Pippin if you so wish. And interestingly, anytime I get a chance to talk about the M2, you know I'm going to, the Pippin uses a PowerPC 603 processor, and the 3DO M2 uses a PowerPC 602. So outside of the fact that the Pippin has absolutely no GPU, it does have some similarities to the 3DO M2, and yes, I left it dusty because people always send me really nasty emails saying, why did I dust it? And I leave it dusty just for them. But we're going to get into the games I think you should play on Pippin. It is not going to be many, but there are a few things to love about the system, and because I love collecting weird esoteric things, I own one. But my answer to you, should you buy one? Probably not. Let's get to the games. Now, right off the top, any video about the Pippin is going to involve Super Marathon, and while I love the original Marathon, Marathon 2 is the more modern version of this franchise, and it is the one that I recommend you play on the Pippin. Now, be very, very, very well aware that if you want to buy a copy of this game for your Pippin, there's not even any out there. The last one I saw sold for over $2,000, and that is just insane, because Marathon and Marathon 2 are basically on every other platform you could possibly want, and they're going to be better versions than the Pippin version, because even with my expanded RAM here, it doesn't seem to ever want to play the soundtrack. It has sound effects, but for some reason there's either a bug or a glitch in the code that doesn't even give you the soundtrack, and that is just disappointing. But this is a great game, and it's probably the best game you can play on the Apple Pippin. You know it, you love it, and this is what Bungie was up to before a lot of their more modern games. It looks and sounds really nice for the sound effects, the frame rate is good, and we do have the full screen there, although I wish the heads-up display was not so huge on the bottom. But this is the game that you're always going to hear talked about when you hear the Pippin mentioned, and it's not just because it's a very popular game, it's also because this game barely existed. People from Bungie have talked about this release, and they say that they maybe made 100 copies or so, because obviously the Pippin was not doing well. It was a failure in Japan, and it was an even bigger failure in the North American market. So a lot of the best games are basically going to be impossible to find. And that's another main reason why I say if you want to collect for this, you probably shouldn't, because you're not even going to be able to find most of the stuff I'm talking about in this video. If I wanted to be foolish and go buy a copy of this game, I would not buy it, but I couldn't even find it if I wanted to. But it does work well on the Pippin. The D-pad is, pretty competent of a control scheme. Definitely not as good as keyboard or mouse, but you can hook up a keyboard and mouse to the Pippin and play it that way as well. But unfortunately, like I said, it just doesn't have any soundtrack elements on my Pippin, and I have talked to other collectors as well, and they encounter the same thing. What I'm going to let you do is listen to just a little bit of the Super Marathon soundtrack, because it is quite good. I'll be back in 30 seconds. I'll show you the next game I think you should play if you want to buy a Pippin. But enjoy. That's what you would hear if I could get any soundtrack out of my Pippin, but I cannot, so I had to overlay that soundtrack element, or maybe it got copyright flagged and you just heard silence. I'm not sure, and that is the bummer about the Pippin version of Super Marathon. For some reason or another, nobody seems to be able to get it to actually play any of the soundtrack. But it's an awesome game, and if you own a Pippin or you want to buy one, it's definitely one of the first things you're going to want to check out, because it is one of the Pippin's most famous games. Like I said earlier, there's so many other better ways to play this. Do not buy an Apple Pippin just to play Super Marathon. You'd be making a mistake. Now on to Jungle Island. I absolutely love this game. It is a cute, absurd, weird point-and-click adventure game for the Apple Pippin that has so much charm and so much uniqueness to it. I can't help but love it. Like I said earlier in the video, this is made by Saru Brunei, the same people that would go on to make Cubivore. The mechanics are quite simple. Move your monkey around the screen with the trackball, turn and navigate your world, and figure out how to solve puzzles, because at the beginning we're stuck on this island and we need to move the model around until we get to this wood in the back, which is going to allow us to make a bridge at the other corner. I personally think this is the Pippin's best game, and it's the one that I recommend to everybody. Like pretty much every Pippin game, there's other ways to play it that are much cheaper and much easier. This game was also ported to the Sega Saturn, and you can go on eBay right now and buy a copy of it for $10. If you want to buy a Pippin version of this game, if you could even find it, it's going to be like $200 to $300. So just because I say it's one of the best games to play on Pippin does not mean you should go out and buy a Pippin for it. But this island is filled with all these little mini games and puzzles that you basically need to solve, and I've never actually beaten this game. It is so obtuse and random that I'm never even quite sure what I'm supposed to do next. I don't even know if the game has an ending or if it is just basically one artistic experiment, but that monkey has definite Cubivore vibes going on, and you can see where they would get to Cubivore from something like this. But this is this classic 90s point-and-click adventure game where nothing makes sense, but you're always intrigued about what's going to happen next. And I have played this game on my Pippin for hours on end, enjoying every last minute of it. So if you do have a Pippin, or you want to buy a Pippin to have that on your shelf, this is the game that I would recommend you play first, because it's probably the most indicative of what something like the Pippin could do. Do not ask me why the monkey goes with the ball when you hit it. It makes no sense to me, but it is just what is there. Now it does have some traditional adventure game puzzles as well, like this train track here. We're able to move the train forward and backwards, and there's also a pivotable turntable in the middle that'll reroute the train. So if you did grow up in the 90s generation and you like those point-and-click adventure games like Myst, then you're definitely going to love this game as well, because it has all of those same mechanics and vibes going on, except it's more colorful, more cute, and has a great soundtrack as well. And speaking of soundtracks, of course, you know it's Video Game Esoterica, so I'm going to give you a listen in just a second. But again, these train puzzles are just so much fun. It takes a long time to figure out what is needed, but once you finally figure the solution out, the sense of accomplishment is great. But like I said, awesome soundtrack. Listen for 30 seconds, I'll come back and show you a few more games that I think are musts on Pippin. But enjoy! Not sure at all how that soundtrack has anything to do with a monkey exploring a park on an island, but that's just what you get, and it is pretty intriguing. But this game is just chock full of puzzles, and they have absolutely no explanation whatsoever. This is trial and error, but it's cute, it's colorful, it's fun, and it takes advantage of the Pippin hardware really well, using the trackball and the two top buttons as your left and right hand click to navigate the entire world. Again, is this worth buying a Pippin for? Absolutely not. Buy it on the Sega Saturn. It's $10 shipped, and it is the exact same game with a little bit better visuals. So if you want to play Jungle Park, just grab the Saturn version and give it that go. Now moving on to one of the exclusive games that I do not believe was released anywhere else, except I can't find any evidence of it. That is Gundam Tactics Mobility Fleet 0079. That's the whole title. I'm just going to call it Gundam from now on, so don't trip over that. This is an awesome game. This is the one game that I come back to like every year or so and play a few rounds, because I do have a save file still on my Pippin, and I will pick up where I left off. It's basically a real-time strategy turn-based game where you pick a side and you fight in the universe of Gundam. When we first get into the game, you're going to be given this menu. You have your ship, you have your loadout, you have your different characters you can carry. You configure everything like that before you go out. Now, because this is a Japanese exclusive release, be aware that you're not going to be able to understand anything that's going on unless you use a translation app or if you speak Japanese. But you basically see where you need to go on the map, you navigate your ships around, and then once you get close to an enemy, you can attack. And all of the attacking is turn-based, so you're basically just planning what's going on. But this game works great on the Pippin because, again, it uses the trackball and the buttons as a mouse, and it works great. But this is another game that I believe you can pop into a Macintosh, and it does have an executable for it. But this is another game that's always talked about when people talk about the Apple Pippin, and I think it is a lot of fun. But the reality of the situation is, if you're looking for an RTS game from this era, there are definitely better ones than Gundam Tactics. It might be a reason, if you're a huge Gundam fan, to buy a Pippin and have this in your collection, or if you stumble across a cheap Pippin and want it for your collection, this is a game I recommend playing. I just don't think you should go out and buy a Pippin for it. But I will say, all of the artwork, all of these 3D models that are pre-rendered, it does have a good vibe, and it is very intriguing, and for some reason it reminds me of Team Innocent on the PCFX, another deep cut game. It definitely has a style all its own, and I do love it for that. But it's just one of those games. Every time you hear the Apple Pippin mentioned, people are going to mention Gundam Tactics, and that is a good reason. It is just a fun game, and I have talked to a few Japanese collectors I know, and one of the three of them has this in their collection and says that it has a decent following in Japan. But even in Japan, the Pippin is not a popular console whatsoever, even if that's where it sold the most units. It's just not a successful system. You guys keep asking me to talk about it, and I really hope you do watch this, because it took a long time to make this video to tell you what games you should play on the Pippin and to mostly convince you out of buying one. But Gundam Tactics is intriguing. As you get further into the game, the boards get more difficult, and some can last 20-30 minutes, and when you lose a 30-minute board, you just need to want to go back right in and win it. It keeps dragging you back for more, and that is the sign of a good game. So as far as games that maybe a Pippin would be worth buying for, I would say Gundam Tactics is really sitting on the fence there. Buy it, don't, I really don't know. Another game that I think you should check out if you want to buy a Pippin is going to be L-Zone. Now, this is a point-and-click adventure game, except it is even more esoteric than most point-and-click adventure games. It's hard to even call this a game. It's more of a virtual artistic experience. But again, like pretty much every game on the Pippin, you can also just get this for DOS or for Macintosh or even Windows. So honestly, if you can find a copy of L-Zone to buy for a Pippin, it's going to cost you a small fortune compared to getting a copy for any sort of PC, going to be a lot cheaper. But again, it is a Pippin specific game that works on the hardware, and it is one of those games that people definitely know exists for the Pippin. And as far as all the pre-rendered graphics, all the point-and-click style fun, I do think it is a great game, and I think as an artistic experience, it is something that everyone should check out at least once. And it is one of those games, I'm never going to go back to it on my Pippin. I've beaten it once, and I'm never going to need to see it again. But if you do own a Pippin, it is something you should check out. Because the Pippin library is so thin, and it's so weird, and it's filled with so much edutainment software, something like L-Zone does absolutely work, and it is a fun experience to have. And as you're navigating through this world, you're always wondering what's going on, what is next, and what it is that you're actually doing. Because you're never quite sure what's happening in L-Zone. Even when you finish the game, you're not quite sure what you just saw, but it does stick with you. I'll never forget playing this game. I played it for the first time on Pippin, and it's the game that I probably most closely associate with the hardware. But if you did not grow up in the 90s in the era of Myst, this is probably something that you're not going to be interested in whatsoever outside of the random experience. You have to come from a background of having played point-and-click adventure games back in the day to understand what L-Zone wants out of you and what you're supposed to take from it. Because if you don't have that background, this is just going to seem like a really strange-looking point-and-click adventure game that has absolutely no story and no reason to continue on outside of seeing what happens next. But I am curious if everyone's even heard of L-Zone, so leave me a comment down below and tell me, did you know this game even existed? And if you have any idea what's going on, because if I push one button here, I see a skeleton floating around in a yellow beam. It doesn't do anything, it doesn't seem to unlock anything, it just seems to exist. But there is more than one button on the console here, so if we navigate around a little bit, we can make that skeleton disappear, and if we push the blue button, a brain just pops up. I don't know why, I don't know what it's supposed to mean. Leave me a comment down below and tell me if you have any idea. Now, speaking of point-and-click adventure games, Victorian Park is also another one, and this game is even weirder. It seems to be an Alice in Wonderland story told from the first-person perspective, and you get to navigate around the world by clicking on this little disc at the bottom and then clicking on things throughout. This is what the Apple Pippin provides to you folks. I'm not making fun of these games, I'm not saying they're terrible, they just exist, and I don't know why suddenly someone's asking me if they should buy an Apple Pippin. You guys have shown a lot of interest in asking questions about it, so I do hope you watch this video because my first run of Pippin videos were not good whatsoever. So maybe this video is more of a cautionary tale as to why you should not buy an Apple Pippin. If stuff like this looks intriguing to you, maybe you go out and get one, but honestly, like everything else, you can play this on other systems as well. You don't need to own a Pippin to play Victorian Park, but it does have some great voiceover acting and some good music, so go ahead and listen for 30 seconds, and I'll come back and show you one more game.
もう遅いからきっとお嬢ちゃんが最後のお客だよ。ところでお嬢ちゃんは宝島を読んだことがあるかな？なかなかのどんな冒険なんだよ。
So yeah, that's Victorian Park. It's totally an experience. It totally has something to do with Alice in Wonderland, and it definitely has some D vibes on the 3DO or the PlayStation 1 or Sega Saturn or whatever console you want to play D on. Definitely not horror related, but it does have a similar feel, at least in this room here, 2D. And it's one of those things, this is what's available on the Pippin, and you need to decide for yourself whether or not you think it's worth it. And the reason I'm really doing this video is to talk about Pippin games, give you kind of a history of it, and convince you out of it. Now, Racing Days in screenshots is always shown as one of the games on the Pippin that runs in 3D, and in screenshots it looks great. In actual reality, this is a masterclass explanation as to why you do not ship a console like the Pippin just with a PowerPC 603 and no chip on board to handle 3D. This is all being done in software like you used to do back in the day on DOS, and it 100% shows. It is a good technical showcase that the Pippin can do 3D graphics, but it's also a perfect explanation as to why 3D graphics are better handled by custom bespoke chips on the board. But these are the games I recommend you check out on Pippin if you so want to check them out. But my honest recommendation is just to leave Pippin on the shelf. There really isn't that much there, and some of my favorite games like Jungle Park you can just go play on the Sega Saturn. But everyone kept asking me what I thought about Pippin, and here is your video on it. I hope to never have to talk about it on the channel again, because while I do love my prototype unit and the development history of Pippin, as far as the library is concerned, there is not enough meat here to justify a purchase, and that's why it's failed. Sure that, leave me a comment down below if you have any questions, but I will see you for the next video, and I hope you enjoyed this one. Bye bye.